It's the spookiest time of the year and one of the spookiest places in the country. Across New England, legends loom of ghosts and mystical creatures, and no one knows more about those stories than Jeff Belanger. With decades of experience in the paranormal and spectacular, he's a writer for the hit show Ghost Adventures and an Emmy-nominated producer and host of his own show, New England Legends. We're happy to have him join us to talk about those things that go bump in the night. The Municipal Voice is a Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Good to be with you. Happy October.
Good stuff going on. So, as I said, Halloween is rapidly approaching, and you are the host, writer, producer of the Emmy-nominated TV show New England Legends, as well as hosting a weekly podcast of the same name.
Yep.
So, obviously, we're going to talk about some spooky stuff today.
Sounds good.
So, first off, can you let the audience at home know a little bit about you and how you got into ghost stories and legends? Was this, family pastime, or did you, see a ghost that sparked the interest?
Yeah. So I was born in Massachusetts, but I grew up in Sandy Hook, Connecticut.
Okay.
And being an old historic town, like so many in New England, I had friends that lived in some old houses, including some that they claimed were haunted. So my buddy Dave lived down the street. His house was built in 1760. Okay. I mean, think about that. We weren't even America yet. We were still England when that house was built. And it was just one of those things like, from time to time, we see an old guy, walk down the hall and disappear, and don't tell your parents, they'll think we're crazy.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, that's intriguing. I also grew up, Sandy Hook, as you may know, is the town next to Monroe, Connecticut, which is where Ed and Lorraine Warren lived. And so I knew the Warrens since I was about 13 years old. I used to attend their programs in the fall. And I thought, wow, this is just so intriguing. I didn't have my own ghost experience for many years, but I was completely intrigued by the notion of haunted places. I loved history. I loved talking to people. And I went to school to be a writer and started writing for newspapers and magazines. And around October, Matt, you might find this shocking, but in October, the media goes looking for ghost stories and people to talk to. You're going to have to take my word for this. But it becomes a thing, right?
So
we want to talk about
you're a hot commodity for October.
Suddenly you're a hot commodity, right? So I was, like you, looking for hot commodities in October. And I was like, this is great. I love these stuff. I love the features and everything. So that turned into a website. Then I started writing books. Then I started working for Ghost Adventures. Then I started New England Legends. This was a career I never planned, but one I wouldn't trade for anything.
Yeah, a career you can't plan. There's no college major for this sort of thing. But you did mention, of course, Connecticut's very own legends, Ed and Lorraine Warren. What sort of debt do you and everyone kind of that does the sort of things that you do owe to them and sort of modern ghost legends and the telling of them?
What's so intriguing about Ed and Lorraine Warren is that they're way more famous today, now that they've passed away, than they ever were when they were alive. Back then, they were very much like regional celebrities. And it's hard for us to imagine because there's so many paranormal television shows, there's so much paranormal content out there. That back then in the 70s and 80s, like ghosts were in the closet. This wasn't something
obscure stuff.
Absolutely. And they were doing it. They were out there giving talks at colleges and universities, and they were going on, talk shows, and they were in the media. They were putting this stuff out there and really helping to sort of pave the way to normalize talking about it. Along with others, they weren't the only ones, but absolutely, they were really at the forefront before it became mainstream. Now
and doing it at a time when it wasn't necessarily like, oh yeah, that's a great idea for a way to earn a living or way to tell stories or whatever. It was like, they were doing it. It was much more on the fringe sort of thing. Like it wasn't an easy decision.
And their angle too was very Roman Catholic. And like Ed was all about like demons and vanquishing evil and all this other stuff. So he viewed himself as kind of a crusader against this stuff. And either way, very entertaining. And they got the stories out there. And now their research is being made into hit movies that we watch again and again.
Now they're legends in their own right.
Right.
So you've been a writer on the show Ghost Adventures for 25 years now. What's it like?
15 actually.
15? Oh, okay.
That's all we've been around is 15. It started in 2008. So yeah.
All right, I'm going to talk to my writer, but
Yeah, yeah.
15 years, which is still a long time from the beginning. And then long enough certainly to have seen the rise of ghost hunting as a, you know, an activity, as a thing that goes on in this country. What has it been like to see that rise?
When Ghost Adventures started, I mean, I'd already been writing books. I had my website, and I got a call saying, "Hey, we're going to do this show, just 8 episodes for the Travel Channel." And I was like, "Oh, cool! I've written for newspapers, magazines, internet, books, television's new, so let's do this." And we did the show, and it started to air. And Travel Channel said, "We have a hit. You know, how fast can we get back to work?" And we said, "I guess tomorrow." And that was our last day off. Was 2008. So it's been crazy because like Ghost Adventures has also become sort of pop culture, not just you know, talking about paranormal research, but it gets lampooned on talk shows, clips get played, and so on. So that's been pretty amazing to see. And then all the other shows that have come and gone, you know, I mean, just dozens and dozens of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially a genre at this point.
Absolutely. In fact, someone I know who works at the television network said, we now view paranormal the way TV views cooking shows, right? Cooking shows have been on air for 50, 60 years. They will always be on the air. They'll change different personalities, but it's here to stay. And that's how they view paranormal. And I think the reason is because we really yearn for answers. And when you're talking about the paranormal, you get to talk about the biggest questions that have ever been asked, right? Like, what happens after we die? Are we alone in the universe? Do we know every creature that walks the earth with us? And when you talk about the paranormal, you get to ponder and kick around these questions in a very safe way without talking about religion and its dogmas. I mean, if I said, "Hey, let me tell you about my religious faith," you'd squirm and you'd be like, no, 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 no. What are the odds we're going to agree?
Let me tell you a ghost story.
Yeah, a ghost story. You'll be like, all right, I'm listening, right? Because you could say, well, I don't believe, and that's fine. There's still inherent value in a ghost story, even if you don't believe in an afterlife or ghosts or otherwise.
Yeah. Now, you said you were born in Massachusetts, you grew up here. Is there something particularly spooky about New England? You know, you've got 312 episodes of your podcast about New England's being spooky. Like, it doesn't seem like you're stopping anytime soon. What makes New England so spooky?
So I think there's kind of a perfect storm in New England of what happens, right? So number one, we've got a lot of history here. And I recognize I'm talking about colonial history, but there's native history as well. I mean, we've named towns and things. And so there's just thousands of years of human history in this part of the country. We also have a sense of preservation in New England. And I'm generalizing, forgive me, but I know no other way to answer this. When you go to other parts of the country, if a strip mall is 40 or 50 years old, they just tear it down and they put up something brand new. You know, here, when you drive down main streets of various towns, that's exactly what it looked like 150 years ago, right? Except there were a few less Dunkin' Donuts back then. Just a few less.
Different signs on the facades, but brick and
and so it was that's what it looked like. And so we preserve our history here. And we also have this sort of matter-of-factness about this subject. So in certain parts of the country or the world, if you mention ghosts, people get rather frightened and they say, well, we're talking about God or the devil now. And I don't know if, you know, here we can just be like, yeah, it's haunted. And then also you add in our northern climate. In the winters, we hibernate and we sit around and we talk about stories and we share these tales.
It gets dark and it's cold out and you huddle by the fire. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you know, and of course, New England, we were built for the fall. When people think of the fall nationwide, they think of New England. So I think it's just sort of this perfect storm, Salem witch trials, and, you know, all these sort of things came together that we sort of embrace our history and we embrace our ghosts.
Yeah, the Salem witch trials, of course, being a CCM, I got to give a shout out to Connecticut. Well, actually, I don't know if the shout out, but there was witch trials in Connecticut even before Salem.
Before you won, and by the way, well done, Connecticut.
I don't know if that's something to be proud of, but we have have pardoned them, I believe.
You pardoned two. You had the best. You had the best PR cover up ever. So there were witch trials that began in Hartford years before Salem, and I forgive me if I'm wrong. I want to say 11 people were executed, not all at once, but over the span of years for witchcraft. And so, and then shortly after that, 1692 comes along, Salem happens. And what people need to understand in the context of the time is that after that happened, people were all over, were just like, that was a travesty. Like it wasn't, they knew immediately. It's not like we knew
even back then they knew like that was crazy. Like something went very wrong there.
Exactly. So they knew even back then, like, this is really not how the world should work. And so Connecticut started scratching their head saying, we did that. Just get rid of the records. Because when they were trying to pardon those accused of witchcraft, there was a whole organization in Connecticut doing this. They wrote to the Queen at the time, she was alive, wrote to the Queen of England and said, can we have a posthumous pardon? And they said, we absolutely have something in place for this. You have to send us all the court records and we can issue it. And the court records are gone. The only reason we know about them is because family records and journals said so. My mother was taken away.
Something that far back, do we know that they were purposely kind of gotten rid of? Like the other records from 16 whatever are still around, and then there's this big kind of blank area sort of going on.
I would say right around 1692, some stuff went missing. If I had to guess, right?
But 1690 is good, 1694 is good, but somehow just magically, okay.
Well, that's the year those records got expunged, I'm guessing. But at the same time, and this is why we talk about this stuff, because the past should haunt us. We have literally murdered people because we disagreed with them politically or otherwise, and so there's an inherent lesson to keep those stories around, whether it's Salem or Hartford, Connecticut, or wherever else.
Yeah, it's not just ghosts per se, but some of these stories involve real people and real events, and
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you choose then which stories to cover? What kind of research goes into telling these kind of stories?
So what's great at this point, we've been doing this so long that our stories are mainly crowdsourced. We get emails almost every day. We're just like, hey, have you heard about this? I mean, I didn't grow up in every little small town in New England, right?
Yeah.
And so people are just like, in my town, we had this story. And those are my favorite now, like these really obscure little things that you'd have to be local to know. And the research is, what's so great is we live in a time that, like there used to be these thick books, like the complete history of, Milford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And it would, like, 4 copies exist, and it would be in a library, and you'd have to go there and port.
You have to go to the Milford Public Library and look at it in there. And
that's right. And now it's on archive.org. It's searchable for free, and you can get through some of these you can find these old nuggets in there where they were just sort of reported on. Oh, there was a witch trial in town. There was a haunted building, or there was this murder. And so the research is talking to libraries, to historical societies, looking at old texts. But also our format is such that, hey, it's meant to entertain, right? To sort of, and for me, what we're doing is we're telling the backstory. Because when you walk up to a building and someone says that building right there on Main Street is haunted, the next question you have to ask is why? Why would it be haunted?
What happened there? Yeah,
exactly. And the only way to answer that is you go back in time and you put it into the context of the day, and you learn, oh, there were people who lived here. There were people who died here. There was history that left a mark. And that's why we still talk about this building and not the one right next door. For whatever reason, we don't talk about that one. And so to me, that backstory, that going back in time and witnessing what happened and realizing that the story will change and alter over the telling and so on. But there's some thread that sort of goes all the way back to the beginning if you follow it.
Yeah. You write about the stories and you research, and we see the history of it. But do you personally, have you seen a ghost?
I have seen a ghost.
Okay, you have seen a ghost. Okay.
Yeah. I've been doing this 25 years now, and all over the world. I've been on almost every continent. I'm only missing 2 at this point. And so I've seen, a few times I can say I've seen something that I have no other word.
That you cannot explain in any other way.
The first time it happened, I was in Paris, France, and I was in the catacombs of Paris, 30 meters below the city, surrounded by bones, completely alone. No one would go with me. And so I'm surrounded by literally millions of skeletons. And I'm walking down this long hallway, and I see this shadow the size of a man go from one side to the other and then back again. And I just sort of froze. And I said, all right, wait a minute. I know I'm alone. There's no one down here. And then I'm thinking maybe there's a side tunnel and I missed somebody, but nope, it's straight all the way. And it's one of those things where, I'd interviewed hundreds of people about their ghost experiences up to that point. Now it's thousands. But at that point, I was just like, oh, this must be what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't ask for this. I was just standing here and this happened. And the analogy I like to use is it's like a lightning strike. I mean, you're aware that lightning strikes the earth like hundreds of times a day, just not usually right near where you're standing.
Yeah.
But if lightning ever does strike right near where you're standing, you will never forget it the rest of your life.
Yeah. Would you have called yourself a skeptic before that moment?
I'm a skeptic now. I mean, like, I mean, sure, I don't believe everything that I hear, but I understand that there's some reason that it's around. And so I've had experiences. I believe this stuff is real beyond a story. What it is, I can't fully explain, but at the same time, I mean, yeah, you can't believe everything you hear, but at the same time, you got to ask, why do you keep hearing the same story about certain locations and certain places?
Yeah, and also I wonder, is there something to the commonality now that we can look on the internet and find all these local little stories of how many of the stories sound similar, and there's similar themes and ideas from people that were at the time that was happening very unconnected.
Totally. I mean, so I love the trope of unfinished business, right? I mean, the unfinished business, by the way, is always with the living, never with the dead, right? If someone's murdered, Lizzie Borden's, dad and stepmother murdered at the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts. No one was ever punished for that crime.
Yeah.
And the house has a haunted reputation. You could say it's the ghosts crying out for justice, sure, or maybe that's just us being really frustrated that someone killed two people and no one was punished for that. That will haunt you, and it gnaws at you. And so that's the unfinished business. We have it.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. One of the nice stories we encountered was over the pandemic, there was a talk you gave at the Morris Public Library via Zoom, which we featured in our magazine, Connecticut Town and City. And you do talks around the country. And one of the nice things is that you really set the atmosphere, like you're telling stories around like a midnight campfire for people. Are these talks fun? How do you choose the stories to feature? How do you, cater to a location?
Yeah, so the podcast has been going for 6 years now, and we haven't missed a week in 6 years, 52 a year, and so hundreds of stories have come in. And what's great is that during the pandemic, I finally had the time to take all these stories and turn them into like a visual story. And when I tell these stories, there's just something to look at while I sort of tell you the tale. And I finally had the time to break them all into their own sort of unit. And the analogy is this: I'm like a band that knows 300 songs, and tonight I'm going to play 10 of them. And so if you said, I need you to go on in 20 minutes, I can be ready in 20 minutes, and I can go through my 300 songs and say, where am I in Connecticut? Am I in Northeast Connecticut? Oh, I got a couple stories around here. Grab that, grab that, grab that. I'll include this one. I haven't told it in a while. This one's one of my favorites. I just enjoy telling it. Someone requested that one, and then boom, I've got 10 tales, 1 hour. And off we go. It's a set list. That's exactly what it is. It's a set list. And so, and that's what, and it's, so that was one upside of the pandemic, was I finally had the time to do all that. And and it's great. And so, so every time I give the New England Legends talk, it's different because I don't want to get bored with it either.
Yeah. It just makes me wonder, do you think, have there been spooky stories that have come out of past pandemics? And, do you think there's going to be ghost stories that come out of this most recent one, or are there already?
Yes, Matt. Yes. So when the pandemic hit, we started focusing a lot of our stories on vampire stories of New England. There's a bunch: Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts,
Jewett City,
Jewett City, the Jewett City vampires. That's exactly right. Griswold, Connecticut. Yeah. So so we started telling these stories of vampires. Vampires before Bram Stoker in the 1890s were plague victims, usually consumption, tuberculosis. And
wasn't sexy guys in bow ties or sparkle vampires or
No, this was walking corpses, more like our modern notion of zombies, as opposed to, but they weren't feeding on brains, they were feeding on the lifeblood, the vitality of the living. And when consumption hit, I mean, that was a huge global killer. People could die in a matter of weeks or months or years for some people. Some people lived with it the rest of their days. And, folks back then weren't stupid. They understood contagion. I mean, when a kid comes in the house with a cold, everyone in the house is going to get the cold. That's not, that's not rocket science. But when you're scared, when 2, 3, 4 members of your family die, and then 2 or 3 others are unharmed, in the house down the street, everybody died. In the house the other way, nobody died. You start looking for some order in that chaos, and you start saying, well, why am I plagued and they're not? And then someone tells you you're the victim of a vampire. And if your child is dying, if your child is sick and wasting away, and waking up with like blood on the corner of her chin and so on. And you wonder, like, is she being drained of this in the night when I'm sleeping? And someone tells you, dig up your last one to die and look for signs of vampirism, burn their vital organs, and you might break the spell.
Yeah.
That sounds insane. I get it. And right now, with our rational, healthy brains, that sounds completely nuts. But if you're desperate and you know your last loved one isn't going to be any deader, you try it. And here's the crazy thing. Once in a while, it works. Once in a while, the person gets better. My skeptic friends would say, well, that's just, they were going to get better anyway. And you might be right. You might be right, but it doesn't matter. It has to work 1 in a million times, and someone will try it.
And then that story gets passed on that it worked the one time. Yeah.
Right. When you think about how do you kill a vampire, everyone knows this one. Go, Matt, tell me, how do you kill a vampire? Modern day.
Stake through the heart.
It's through the heart, right?
Or you call Wesley Snipes.
Right. Either way, right? Stake through the heart, though, is a little more common before Wesley. And you do that because in old folklore, you were nailing the corpse to the ground. It wasn't a stake through the heart. You just didn't want the corpse to be able to get up and rise.
You're physically holding him down. Yeah.
That's it. I was just nailing you down so you can't come out of your grave anymore and feed on my family. So so even in the fiction, you can find parts of folklore fact.
Yeah. When you go and do these stories, and you're telling them in person, do people get scared? Do you ever freak anybody out at these?
Sometimes. I mean, I think sometimes a particular story might hit close to home for somebody. I try to keep it entertaining and often pretty funny. I mean, if you've seen it, then like sometimes I tell a lot of jokes. And the reason for that is not accidental. I mean, I think a good story sort of moves you through an emotional roller coaster where some jokes, you can say, yeah, this sounds silly, but someone literally ripped the heart out of their daughter's corpse and burned it. You can sort of move people through and disarm them with humor and say, like, look, when COVID hit, I remember thinking, oh, we've been here before. We've been through this. We weren't alive, but our ancestors have been through this. And so, imagine telling the story 150 years from now. And, back in 2019, 2020, there was this virus that was attacking people.
And everybody had to wear a mask all the time. And
you had to. Yeah. And the only cure was to hoard toilet paper. Cause and effect.
Of the future.
Yeah. So, I had 200 rolls of toilet paper and no one here got sick. Therefore, toilet paper keeps you from getting sick. Period. The end. That's it.
200 years, toilet paper will kill vampires. That'll be
That's right.
So recently, you were telling stories at the Mansfield Senior Center, and you were talking about nightmares. How is the nightmares talk different than the legends talk?
Yeah, so I wrote a book about nightmares. It was Your Darkest Dreams Interpreted, and I was asked to write a dream guide, and I really got into it because I was thinking, dreams are. I think anyone who's interested in dream work, you can learn a lot about yourself. And the best dream interpreter in the world, always and forever, is you, the person who had the dream, because you can fit it into the context of your life. And so if you really want to get into dream work, all you need is a pad and pen by your bedside, or I guess you could use your phone or a computer. And when you wake up, you write down the date and everything you remember, and you might start to get some insight. Nightmares are the dreams we really remember. And I believe a dream is a message from ourselves to ourselves. And a nightmare is an urgent message, is something really important that you're dealing with, and you need to get this message immediately. And so it's sort of fun to look at nightmares in popular culture, nightmares in movies and books and literature, but also like what some of the imagery means, and sort of kind of teaching people how to interpret not just their nightmares, but those are the most fun because those are the ones we remember.
And that was one of your books. What was that book called?
It was called The Nightmare Encyclopedia: Your Darkest Dreams Interpreted.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's always a story, right? There's something scary. And by the way, I could tell you no story that's anywhere near as scary as what's in your head, right? Because you know what's.
I cater my own fears to myself. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, some people are petrified of snakes. You may not be, right? Yeah. So, we're all different.
It's also our own interpretation. For those who joined in at the Morse Library talk, you regaled the audience with the legend of the Glowacus. Can you tell us about the mythical Glowacus and its connection to Connecticut journalistic history?
Yeah, so the Glowacus is a great story. January of 1939, there was the Hartford Times and the Hartford Courant. Those are the two big papers in Hartford. And the Hartford Times started to report that there was a strange creature that was killing animals at some of the regional farms. Absolutely newsworthy, important news. So other farmers could read and say, "Oh, I better be a little more vigilant right now." Of course, important. But then some of the eyewitness reports started to come out of seeing this animal, and they described it as like a black, like puma. And of course, pumas don't belong in Connecticut. Mountain lions do show up in Connecticut, but they're not black. They don't turn up all black. So suddenly, people are describing this black thing, this black cat-like creature that's been hunting animals. The Hartford Current sort of went off the rails with descriptions. So what went from like a puma-like creature to it's got the body of a dog and a head like a lion and a horn, and it cries blue tears. Like in the span of like 2 or 3 weeks, it went from an unusual black cat-like creature to something you've never seen or heard of before. And they started calling it the Gloacus. And the more Gloacus reports that came in, Hartford Current started drawing maps. Hartford Times tried to be journalistic, and the Hartford Current started selling advertising. So like one of my favorites, there was like a gas station was saying, use SO oil to make a quick getaway from the Gloacus. And there's an ad they ran of a woman's hair salon that said, "Don't look like a Gloacus. Get a permanent, done here for whatever the money." And so over the span of like 3 or 4 weeks, the Hartford Current just went nuts talking about, and the Gloacus, it sounds almost Latin, right? Like there's this new animal. And then eventually it came through that an editor at the Hartford Current had named it for Glastonbury, Wacky, and Us, the Gloacus. But the funny thing is, this is folklore, right? In the span of 4 weeks, which is really traceable, right? You can go back 4 weeks. Going back 40, 50, 100, 200 years is difficult. Going back 4 weeks is a snap. And so you watched it go from, hey, careful farmers, there's an animal lurking, killing animals, to weird, it's black, like a cat, doesn't belong around here, to lion that cries blue tears, and it's
almost like a chupacabra or something.
That's right. Yeah. And so that was in the span of just 4 weeks. And what I love about that is it's not a yarn, right? It's a cautionary tale. And so if you're a farmer, you're probably not even sleeping anymore, but damn it, that thing's not getting any of my animals, right? You're out there with the shotgun all night long waiting.
Watching out.
Yeah. So it served a purpose. After about 4 or 5 weeks just plastering the news, the most American thing that could ever happen happened. And that is everybody got bored with it, and the news cycle moved on. It didn't turn up. That was it. It was over.
No front page like, oh, oops, there isn't one. It was just something else.
There was one.
The Winstead Wild Man?
The wild man, right? So, but there was a Gloacus. There was an animal killing animals on farms, but they just sort of moved on. The dead one, they didn't shoot it dead and say, "Here, we've got it." They didn't say it's moved on. It just got bored and moved on with the next news cycle. Well done.
Good job, Gloacus.
Yeah.
But there are reports from all across New England of ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, all over the place, New England, all over the state. Is there a part of New England or Connecticut that you find to be more haunted than others?
So the only rules I seem to have come up with when it comes to hauntings is that there must be people that have lived there and live there now. That's the rule, right? If it's a remote area with nobody, you're not going to have many, if any, ghost stories. So, cities have got plenty. Towns have got plenty. Wherever there have been people, there are ghost stories. Whether they're memorable enough to make it to, be turned into like a Hollywood movie or not, that remains to be seen. But yeah, they're all over. No town is immune. Not one that I found yet.
Yeah.
I mean, a particular town. This is the hardest question for me to answer, by the way, and I get asked it every time. What's your favorite? What's the most? What's the biggest? Right? So I have hundreds and hundreds of children, and you can't ask me to pick a favorite.
You can't pick your favorite?
Since we're in New Haven, I do have a favorite in New Haven.
Okay.
Midnight Mary. Midnight Mary is such a great one. And what's so powerful about Midnight Mary is, first, let me tell you the story, right? So allegedly, she's a woman who was buried alive. Yeah. And her aunt had this prophetic dream that, oh my God, she's not dead. She's not dead. Days after she had passed away and been buried at Evergreen Cemetery. And then she was to the point where her aunt had her exhumed, opened the casket. Her face is frozen in horror. There's all these scratch marks on the roof of the casket and so on. And then they just said, oh my God, what have we done? We have to live with this the rest of our days. And then they reinterred her in the cemetery. And the reason it's so powerful is that you can go there right this very minute and you can see her grave. And the epitaph is what's so ominous. And the top reads, the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away. So right there, we're already scared with that, even though, by the way, that's a passage from the Bible. Doesn't matter. We didn't memorize the Bible. And then the rest of the epitaph reads, I'm reading this, I didn't memorize it. At high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind, Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. And she was born December 16th, 1824, which would have made her 47 years old at the time. So she died young. The grave tells you the story. She was perfectly fine, and then she was not. And then you hear the legend of her being buried alive, which is a lot of people's worst nightmare. And then you go there and you've got this ominous epitaph. You've got this boxy grave in the cemetery that you can go see right this very minute. And then at midnight, her ghost is said to lurk around. And what's better than that when it's that specific? You've got a place, a date, a time, a location, and it's all right there. It's tempting, isn't it? And you could say, this is the best part to my skeptic friends. I don't believe in ghosts. It's all whatever, right? And if you're walking by the cemetery at like 11:50, you're not going to swing by. You're not just a tiny bit curious that you're going to like, well, I don't believe in ghosts, but I am going to look. I mean, let's see. Maybe
and does the story, do you know, does it trace back to when she actually died, or did the story kind of come later based on the stone?
I suspect it came later. We don't know for certain she was dug up, by the way. I mean, here's the thing.
There's no news report from the Hartford Courant saying body dug up.
And it would have been the Hartford Courant, by the way. Hartford Times is gone, right? No, there's no story about this. And I mean, come on, let's be realistic. If someone's been in the ground a day or two, if they were alive when they went in the ground, they're not alive now, right? There's not enough air to last. I've actually looked this up for a different podcast, but I forget, like given how much space is in an average coffin, average person, average. It was something like you would last in the neighborhood of an hour or two. And before you'd run out of air. So don't try it at home.
Don't get buried alive.
No.
You mentioned like local legends that were in New Haven. Our offices are on Long Wharf. So I have to ask about New Haven Harbor and the ghost ship of 1647. What is the ghost ship of 1647 all about?
That's such a great story because it was documented by Cotton Mather of Salem witch trials fame. So the long and short of it, in January of 1647, a great ship was built, I believe, in Rhode Island,
and
sailed down.
That's historical fact. There really was a ship.
Yeah,
it really
was a ship. Yep, built in Rhode Island, sailed to New Haven, and they were this was going to be a big boon for the New Haven economy. They were going over to England to sell some stuff, bring some stuff back, and start a nice trade route with a new ship. And the ship seemed wonky right from the get-go. Ships have to be built just right or they won't sail right. And so on the day that it sailed, it was very icy. There was a lot of problems. But with the blessings of the minister, the ship sailed off past the horizon, and everybody, said their prayers and hoped for the best. And no word ever came from the ship again. And this is January of 1647. And so as weeks turn into months and no other ships, it was very common for them, like, oh, we saw the ship, or we got a letter or anything, but no word at all. And at some point you have to assume the worst, that your loved one in the ship is gone. But then in June, so 6 months after the fact, everybody got their answer, what they believed was their answer. They prayed and prayed for some sign from God. And these clouds came in that they said looked exactly like the ship. And it sailed right up to the shore. Many people witnessed this. They said it was basically close enough you could throw a rock and hit it. And then they watched as like a wind shear took the sails off of this cloudy ghost ship. And then the ship just sort of dissipated. And everyone said, this is our answer. We've got the answer. God has told us there was a storm that took the ship down. And Cotton Mather was intrigued with this story. He was collecting stories exactly like these because he was trying to prove the glory of God. And so he put it in his book that a minister from New Haven documented that many people had seen this work of God that was closure and an answer to their prayers. Not the answer they wanted, but still an answer. And so so it sort of, that story survived. Paintings were made of it, and it became New Haven's famous ghost ship.
But it never showed up again.
Not yet, but look out the window, Matt. You never know. I mean, maybe today's the day.
So you said, you can't choose your favorite story because they're all your babies. But is there one that is the audience's favorite? Is there one that people ask you to tell over and over again?
I guess an audience favorite is usually whatever is risen the highest in popular culture, meaning it's been on a movie or on the television shows. So I get asked a lot about the Conjuring House now, which is in Rhode Island, in Burrillville, Rhode Island, because I live now where I live today. It's only about 30 minutes away from me, and I've been to the house many times. I know the whole. It was weird to
watch
that movie.
It's a real place that you can actually see. Yep. Yeah,
it's a real house. Looks nothing like what's in the movie, but it is a real place. And it's strange to have watched that movie. I knew everybody being portrayed in the movie. I know the whole Perrin family who lived there, and it's their story. I know Ed and Lorraine Warren. I know the people that owned it, 5 years ago. I know the people that own it now. And it's one of those things where it's haunted, but the movie is an incredible stretch of fiction.
Yeah.
Right. And I enjoyed the movie, but that's not a documentary. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people think it is. And they're just like, you've been in like one of the most frightening houses on earth. And I said, oh, and to me, I'm like, oh, I've been in way scarier places than that. But it. And it's, I guess, again, to use the band analogy, like sometimes you play the hits, right? Because that's what they want to sing along with. So I can tell them the real story of the Conjuring House. It's been around almost 300 years. This is an old house. It's seen some stuff. It's seen families come and go. I'm sure it's haunted, but I don't think it's haunted by who or what the movie suggests it's haunted by.
Hollywood doesn't always get it right.
They never get it right. But at the same time, quick note on that. When you see it in the beginning of the movie, it says based on the true story. And you go, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened. Well, based on. They take a lot of liberties. However, true hauntings to me are way more frightening than anything Hollywood dreams up, because honestly, I'm into this stuff. If I'm in a house that's literally trying to eat me and my loved ones, blood coming out of the walls and heads spinning around, I'm gone. I'm out the door. Yeah, like the horror movie would be 45 seconds long. I'd be like, nope, I'm gone. Real hauntings are subtle. Nothing happens for days, weeks, right? It's quiet. You start to calm down and think everything's okay. And then you hear someone walking in the middle of the night and you hear your door open or something. And then you're on edge again for weeks. It's way more subtle, but really way more frightening. It's just Hollywood can't figure out a way to portray that in an hour-and-a-half movie. Yeah. So they just go at you with like nothing but stuff that would make any normal person just run away.
So if the audience at home wants to hear some of these awesome stories, where can they listen to your podcast and watch your show?
The podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. We're on all the services, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, and so on. The show is PBS stations, various PBS stations play it usually around October, but you can watch it if you're an Amazon Prime member. You can watch it anytime.
Anytime you want on Amazon. Okay.
Yeah, and it's online as well. You can visit our website, just search for New England Legends podcast or show, and you'll find us, and it's all there.
And I heard talking about your website that there's a cool feature on your website, that there's a map feature on there. How does that work?
Yeah, so the map was a lot of work years ago, but it's really cool now. So it's basically an interactive Google map, and if you go to the website, every single story we've ever covered becomes a pin in the map. And so if you find yourself in a certain location, you could say like, oh, I'm in northern Maine, or I'm in eastern Connecticut. You'll see all the pins of all the stories we've covered.
What stories are around here?
Yeah, you can click on the pin and it'll say, oh, here's the story, and you can get driving directions, because we tend to only cover stories that you can actually go there. Or at the very least, like stand on the street and observe the house from the street, but you can actually see these places or see where they were. Yeah,
because you want to be encouraging people to go to someone's private property or something. Yeah.
No, like, and that's and by the way, those stories that we've covered were long ago. So if you broke in, you're not going to see it today, but you can stand on the street and say, wow, that's the house where it happened. How cool.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Jeff, thanks so much for speaking with us today. It's been a real privilege, and sounds like a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and happy Halloween. I hope you stay safe.
Will do. Bye-bye.
We'd like to thank our guest, Jeff Belanger. We'd like to thank our sponsors at Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Christopher Gilson is our producer. Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.